Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started today. In our area, Ted needs no introduction. Ted Burleson's someone who's spoken in a lot of our congregations, spoken here at Devil Springs many times. Some of you may not know Ted. He works for the Hamilton Church of Christ. He has served as a counselor, a professional counselor for many years, and has a lot of experience with that. And he's done speaking on this very sensitive issue. This issue, and in our community, has hit home a lot recently, especially since March 2020, and most recently of January of this year. And so Ted's going to speak to us on dealing with suicide, and so we'll turn it over to him in just a moment.
Thank you, Justin. There are some people that told me at lunch that they would not be here in this class because it was just too painful. And I understand. And I want this to be very informal. So feel free to interject things, ask questions. I may not know the answer. If you didn't get one of these bracelets, please, we'll give some of those out. Frodo, would you? Here, Philip. You don't mind. She doesn't have one. Thank you. My first experience with suicide was when I was a little boy. A relative killed himself, and I was about 9 years old, and I couldn't understand it. Couldn't understand why you would do that. But I hope everyone received one of the handouts. I want to talk about suicide, and we're going to talk about it from a biblical standpoint. We're also going to talk about it from just a practical, everyday experience, because about every 11 seconds, someone in the world commits suicide. Let's just have a show of hands. How many of you have known someone who committed suicide? Almost every hand in the room went up. It's a very prevalent experience, tragic. It affects the whole community. When there's a suicide, it doesn't just affect that family. It affects the whole community. A few years ago, I preached in Tennessee for 28 years, and I had preached a sermon that particular Sunday, and then this young lady, she was 15 years old, named Mika Kaups. I remember distinctly where she was sitting. She was sitting up in the edge of the balcony, and that afternoon she went home and took her life. And you know what I started thinking about? What do you think I thought? What could I have said that had prevented that? What did I did not say that she needed to hear? And it's almost always some kind of guilt. It's kind of like I'm not a firearms person. I don't even own a gun. I'm not opposed to gun control or all that stuff, but I just don't have one because I wouldn't shoot them. They'd just take it away from me and shoot me. So, but when you shoot, there's a residue of gunpowder that comes back on your hand. And here's the thing about it. What we do has an effect on everyone that knows us. So I hope everyone has a PowerPoint slides. Instead of showing them up here, I thought we'd just hand them out. 800,000 people die by suicide every year, and that's just in the U.S. That's not around the world. One suicide affects approximately 15 to 30 individuals, unless it's a student. If it's a student, it affects hundreds, not just dozens. Every year, at least 12 million people lose a loved one to suicide and become survivors. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is being the survivors. Being the survivors. Now, I know this is hard for some of you because some of you have been through this not long ago. But I want us to start by looking at some sources that I brought. This is it's not written necessarily from a Christian perspective, but this is one of the best resources that I could recommend if you like. And I'm going to pass these around if you would like. And the reason I put a post-it note on the back is just so you can see how much it is if you want to order it on Amazon. I'm not a bookseller. I'm not a salesperson at all. Gary Rowe wrote this book, and it's what he does is he goes through the different feelings that we experience as survivors: confusion, guilt, shame, and he does a terrific job. A second book, and this is $15 on Amazon, and it's cheaper than that if you get the electronic version. This is a good book. It's Okay That You're Not Okay: Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand, by Megan Devine. It's an excellent book. It's $15 for the paperback copy, but it's really good. And what Megan Devine does is that she basically talks about the stages that we go through after someone commits suicide in our community or in our school. She talks about how we learn to grieve after that, and trying to find a new normal. The third book is by the same author as the first one that I mentioned, Gary Rowe, and it's called Shattered: Surviving the Loss of a Child. For those who have a child who has, especially children who have committed suicide. And so if you want to, I'll pass these around, and if you want to look at them, fine. If not, just pass it on to the next person. If you don't mind, I'll start with you. The reason I started with those resources is that I'm not sure that we will get through all the material. And I want you to feel free to answer questions, ask questions, share your personal experience. Also, I'm not running for office. I must be the only person in Winston County not running for office, because I saw so many signs on the roadside. But this is my card with my cell number. If I can help you if you're struggling. I'm not advertising. I'm just want you to know that I love you and I'm available to help you. Let's look at some scripture. On the PowerPoint, notice here 1 Corinthians 3:16 and 17. I'm not going to preach the whole time, so relax. But we need to get some scriptural foundation for this. Do you not know that ye are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. This is not to put the guilt on you or put the guilt on someone who has committed suicide, but the word suicide comes from that word sui and side, which means to murder oneself. And so I don't think the church, I love the church. Christ died for it, but I don't think the church has done a great job in teaching about suicide. I was brought up being taught suicide was the unpardonable sin and the ticket to hell. And I'm sorry, but I disagree. We don't know the mental status. We don't know the person's thought process. If somebody could plead temporary insanity in court and it stand, why can we not plead before God temporary insanity? And there's a multitude of reasons that we'll talk about why people would take their own life. The next set of scriptures I want us to look at is from 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20. It's very similar. You were bought with a price. Christ died, so you didn't have to. And then notice Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. I mentioned earlier about Mika Capps, age 15, that took her life on the Sunday afternoon after she heard me preach that morning. I wonder, she would be 36 now. I wonder what Mika would be. I wonder what she'd be doing. I wonder if she'd be married. I wonder if she'd have children. I firmly believe that God has a plan for us. But we'll never know what that plan was for Mika. And that's one of the things that we grieve, what might have been. I have some friends that I talked to, and their family members committed suicide. I talked to one this week, and he said, would you just give me some hope? Would you just give me some hope? And I said, well, I know this, your son loved the Lord. He became a Christian when he was 12 years old at Maywood Christian Camp. I know he loves the Lord, and the Lord knows his heart. And I'm not the judge. And so that's hope. Our hope is in Christ Jesus. Then notice, this is on page 1 of the PowerPoint, down at the bottom left. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean upon your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. But as Brother Lonnie talked about in our opening session this morning, sometimes we're not at ourselves. Sometimes we're not healthy mentally. And sometimes we may not be able to see a future. Men, I'm not picking on us, but a man is 15 times more likely to take his own life than a woman. Now let's just have a little discussion. Why? Why is a man 15 times more likely to take his life than a woman?
I feel like we're in charge, and if we lose that control, then we've lost everything.
Yeah. The dad I talked to this week, he said, I've always been the fixer, and I can't fix this. My son's gone. I can't fix it. We're the fixers, and we can't fix it. What are some other reasons? Men are
less likely to seek help.
That's right. That's exactly, even marriage counseling. Women will reach out for help, and men will say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. I don't need any help. I mean, that's happened to me within the last 2 weeks. I'm good, the guy said. What's another reason?
Coping with failure, kind of in between the two things.
That's
Cope with failure very well.
That's right. That's right. Don't cope with failure very well because boys are not supposed to cry. Don't we teach our little boys, don't cry? I'll tell you something. Little boys need to cry. Big boys need to cry. 1993, my mama died on 2 days before Valentine's Day. And I'd been in ministry, I don't know, 25 years, I guess, at the time. And I could not cry at her funeral because I had done a bunch of funerals, and I couldn't get through it if I cried. So I taught myself not to cry. And my brothers were standing at the end of the casket, and I heard one of them say to the other, "Look at Teddy, he's not even crying." I couldn't cry. Now, 10 sessions and $1,000 later, I could cry. And now sometimes I do funerals for people I don't even know, and I cry. Because we need, men, we need to be able to show our emotions. Also, I'm not against video games, okay? But what can you do if you die in a video game? Reset. And I'm concerned that a lot of people think that you just hit reset. And all right, A guy, especially, not only is he 15 times more likely to take his own life, but he is up to, usually will have a suicide gesture up to 7 times before he actually takes his life. What's a suicide gesture? Yeah, just enough to scare people, to get to go to the emergency room. But what really is that? Cry for help, cry for attention. So God has a plan, but if we call it quits before he gets to fulfill that plan, we've aborted his plan for our lives. Now, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147 and verse 3. So, bereaved survivors, that's what we all are. We asked for a show of hands a while ago, and I saw every hand in the room go up except 2. Well, we have 2 hands, most of us, so I saw every hand go up except 4. Search for help in worship and prayer. Here's the problem. I am so grateful, as Ben Hayes said at the last session, I'm so grateful for Double Springs having this mental health day. I love the church. I believe Christ died for it and gave his blood, but we're not doing a good job in the church with mental health. I'll just give you an example. When somebody says that somebody is bipolar, what do we automatically assume? They're crazy. We used to call bipolar disorder manic depression, because bipolar disorder is a form of depression. And it's almost like people assume it's a death sentence. I have family members with bipolar disorder. I would like for us to change the way we refer to people. Instead of saying, well, she's bipolar, say she suffers from bipolar disorder. Don't identify the person by the, look, I want you to know something. I didn't eat that fantastic banana pudding at lunch. You know why? I'm a diabetic. But please don't just come up to me and say, hey, Ted, diabetic. That's not my name. I'm Ted that suffers from diabetes. It's not my identity. And so let's try our very best to stop labeling people. They're people that Christ loves. And as a church, we need to reach out to them. We need to do something for them. Go ahead. Oh yes, absolutely. I was standing in the visitation line for a funeral visitation the other day, and we were in line for an hour and a half. It was a popular person. He was a doctor in town, and 3 people were standing behind me, and they were talking about a coworker, and they said, he's bipolar. You might as well take him out and shoot him behind the left ear. And I'm like, I don't know you guys, but I don't want to be your friend if that's the way you talk about your friend. So, experience a spiritual crisis. If you're considering suicide, you're having a spiritual crisis. And nowadays we call almost anything spiritual. Have you noticed? I heard someone talk about a song on the other day that they heard on the Sirius XM radio. They said, it was just a spiritual experience. I'll tell you something. Everything that moves you is not spiritual. I had a burrito the other night. It moved me, but it was not spiritual, I promise you. So, let's make sure we know what spiritual is. It's a relationship with the Lord. And not everyone has that. And some people doubt a benevolent God. When I lived in Tennessee, I had a friend. His son took his own life. And that man has not been back to worship. And that's been 40 years. He said, God took my son. does not always prevent things from happening. During the Holocaust, when they were lining Jewish people up to be executed, 2 lines, two, they could see what was happening. And they were saying, where is God? Where is God? Why didn't he stop this? So sometimes we want to know, why didn't God step in and stop this? Some will isolate themselves out of feelings of shame and stigmatization. My wife had 3 great uncles that all took their lives. They were brothers. All 3 in the same family took their lives. There was something going on, but this was long enough ago that no one was diagnosing it. No one was treating it. So, there's a stigma that's attached. Oh, there's that person their son committed suicide, or their best friend. Suicide causes us to experience a different kind of bereavement. If we lose someone to a heart attack, that was beyond their control. I mean, it wasn't something they decided. If we lose somebody to suicide, it was possible an intentional choice. And that makes it totally different. Look on the back, if you will, of the PowerPoint. Possible survivors, bereaved survivors' possible feelings: grief, sadness, anger, denial, longing, blame, guilt, and questions of why. Let's talk about those. I mean, that's a long list, but let's talk about those. Obviously, grief. We're going to miss that person. We're sad about it. What about the anger part? Who are we angry at? Ourselves. What could I have said? What could I have done? What would have been different? A lot of what ifs. It's human nature to second guess ourselves. If you have a parent and they're sick and they're on life support, and you finally decide, look, somebody's got to make a decision, we're going to remove them. Within 3 weeks, what are you going to be asking? What if I hadn't done that? What if I hadn't let them do that? Well, we all second guess ourselves. What about denial? Why would anybody be in denial about that? Half the people I know of that committed suicide, their family says, they didn't do this. Somebody else came in and did this. Because they wouldn't have done this. Somebody else had to sneak in and do this. I know a family right now in Marion County that's searching for the murderer that killed their loved one over 45 years ago. And it's obvious it was suicide. The weapon was laying between his legs. And there were no other fingerprints on the weapon other than his own. Maybe somebody's been watching too many crime dramas. I don't know. Longing. What's that about? Anyone? What's that about? Longing. Just miss them. Let's miss them. If we could hear their voice one more time, we could talk them out of it. What about blame and guilt? Where's the guilt come from?
Could have done something.
Yeah. I should have known. Maybe there's something I could have done. I mean, did I not see them sad? No. Some of y'all might not know who this is, but Naomi Judd took her life with a gunshot. And Naomi Judd was an introvert that forced herself to be an extrovert when she performed. I heard an interview that she did one time, and she said, I'm only good when I'm on stage because then I can fake it. Any of you who've been in theater, know that you can fake it for a little while. But when you're alone, it's hard to fake it. But what was going to happen the next day that Naomi did not want to face? The Hall of Fame. She's going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. She wasn't going to be performing. She was going to be honored. She'd been struggling with depression for years. She'd written a book on it. It didn't keep her from taking her. She was a nurse, but it didn't prevent her from taking her own life because that was her coping mechanism. Justin, one of my professors in graduate school at Freed-Hardeman, one of the best professors I've ever had in my life, took his own life. He had written a book on depression. I heard him speak in chapel on depression. One of the best men I knew. 10 years before he did it, he asked me one day to take some books to his office, and he already had his obituary written out. It was under glass on his desk. And I asked him why, and he said, so my wife won't have to go to the trouble. He'd been struggling with depression for that long. He'd been getting treatment, but at some point he decided, I can't do it anymore. Okay.
So, hey, can I ask, with that obituary, is that a plan? Would you consider that
Yeah.
for 10 years?
For 10 year, a 10-year plan. And he had, other than mine, he had the sweetest wife on earth. Okay, let's talk about intrusive thoughts and dreams about the deceased. That's going to be very normal. We're going to have flashbacks, and they're going to be as real as possible. They're going to be so real that people are going to believe that they really appeared to them during the night, during a dream. Avoidance of stimuli related to the loved one's death. My mother's favorite, she didn't commit suicide, but my mother's favorite song was This Is My Father's World. 669 in our book. When I hear the number, I close my book and I can't sing it. She's been gone since 1993. I can't sing that song. I tried leading it at the White House singing one year and couldn't get through it. It's just, driving by their house, seeing where they park their car, all those stimuli can come back to us and invade our thoughts and cause us to have destructive thoughts. And fear of another member of the community or the family committing suicide. They don't talk about it much because it's still under investigation, but a student at Freed-Hardeman took his life in the dormitory a few weeks ago. And he was from where we used to live. The problem was, over the next 3 weeks, they had 3 more students attempt or say, I'm going to. Because one of the things that we get into is copycat. But just think about it from the standpoint, okay, when let's say that someone takes their life and we have a funeral and the gymnasium at the school or the football field, wherever we have, is packed. And you have this person over here that's never got much attention, and they think, I could get that kind of attention. And so one of the things we have to be aware of after a suicide is copycat. Because I want that kind of memorial. Right. Right.
Because of that, you see everything that's going on. We didn't want someone who's thinking that think, I could be this next situation. Because we
Right.
shouldn't have done that.
That's right. Good point. Let's look at the next one. I'm on back of the page 2, top right. Support from the congregation. sermons, Bible classes, conversations about grace, gratitude, and compassion. When I was getting a degree in psychology at Lipscomb a long time ago, we had a field trip to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, to mental hospital. The largest percentage of residents in the mental hospital at Murfreesboro at that time of any group were Churches of Christ. And I was appalled, and I asked why, and my professor said, because generally we do not preach grace. So we think that's a Baptist doctrine or some other doctrine, and we don't generally preach grace. I hope that's not true. But growing up, I knew one thing about grace. It was on the back of a white flashcard. On the front it said grace. On the back it said unmerited favor. That's all I knew about grace until I was in my 30s. And I heard a sermon on grace during a gospel meeting, and I thought the guy taught false doctrine. I went home and looked up those passages, and he was right. Now, I think what people are afraid of sometimes is we're afraid of grace. How wide is grace? That's something God has to decide. And what about, why do we not like sermons and Bible classes on mental health?
A lot of things we just don't understand.
Yeah, we don't understand a lot.
I tell you, when we were planning this, one of our, they couldn't give us a word, they wanted to really come. He said, I'm glad we're doing this. He said, he meant this not negatively. He goes, that's icky stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he didn't mean that in a negative
Yeah.
way. He was just saying, it makes us uncomfortable.
I do premarital counseling and have for a long time, and you know that only 3% of people who get married in the U.S. get premarital counseling. Why would they not? They're afraid somebody will say, you don't need to get married.
When I was in middle school, my mother approached me. I dealt with childhood depression. She gave me a pamphlet about a mental health camp. I said, you think I'm crazy? And there's a stigma
Yeah.
associated with, that I didn't realize I even had this stigma until she hands me a pamphlet. You know, here's some help for you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you think I'm crazy?
Yeah.
Probably was.
No. I know that Brother Lonnie will probably disagree with this. I'm not speaking for him, but I believe there's no such thing as normal. I think there's like an autism spectrum. I think there's a spectrum, and we're all somewhere between normal and abnormal, and I fall on the abnormal because I have OCD. It bothers me those papers over there are not straight. So somebody would need to straighten those up. I need to know how many lights are in the room and how many ceiling tiles. I need to know how many chairs. That doesn't make me crazy, but I don't tell that to many people. I just told that to the internet. But anyway, we're all somewhere on a spectrum between normal and abnormal, and I think we all feel guilty for our thoughts. If you want to know what I really think, you'd be handing me a pamphlet. But let's talk about that stigma. Yes, Brother Lonnie.
Are anybody in this room perfect? Nope. That's normal off the table.
Yeah. Well, Jesus said where 2 or 3 are together, I will be there in the midst. So he's here. He's the only one perfect. The rest of us are imperfect. Good point. Notice that, realize that suicide can launch a spiritual crisis. People want to know why. And that question, why, I can't explain. Listen without judging. Last Sunday, I had lunch with a lady and her teenage daughter. My wife and I had lunch with a lady and a teenage daughter. And the teenage daughter said, Mom, I want to go to that mental health day they're having at Double Springs. And the mom said, why, are you crazy? Why, do you have mental health problems? She says, no, it's something to do, and there'll be people there my age. And Well, they're not here. You know what? There's a stigma. There's a stigma.
Don't kid yourself. Since March 2020, if you see somebody breathing, they got mental health problems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They might not want to admit it, but it's there.
Absolutely.
It's the degree
Yes.
of mental health
Yes.
problem they got.
Yes.
There is, and I heard it, there is a new number, and it's a very alarming high now since what you said. That
Yeah.
came out.
The people who already had problems before then, this increased, exacerbated the issue. COVID, people who were already struggling with COVID, with isolation. You know, one person called me. He said, "Look, stay-at-home orders doesn't bother me. I've been staying at home for 3 years. This is easy. Now it's just been normalized. Now I don't stick out. I'm not weird. It's just everybody's doing it." I've got to move on because I've talked too much. I'm sorry. You might not have guessed it, but I'm a talker. I'm an introvert who forces myself to be an extrovert when I talk, teach. All right, responses from bereaved survivors about church involvement. A helpful sense of comfort, a helpful sense of connection with the deceased. Intense sadness during worship. You ever cry during songs? You ever cry through a song? Yeah. Certain songs. People will tell me, you know, I couldn't sing that third song. They sang that at my mother's funeral 50 years ago. But there's always a connection. Confusion about God in worship. How can I worship? A 16-year-old asked me the other day, how can I worship a God who will allow that to happen? Negative reminders. Evidence of an afterlife. Impact on spiritual beliefs. So let's talk about suicide prevention, because I want to get to discussion and questions and responses. Give people a sense of belonging. Don't give up. You matter. That's more than a bracelet. That's a message we have to live. Look for hurting people. My wife says, honey, you have sucker written on your forehead. Even when we're on vacation, people come over and talk to you about their problems. I say, I'm sorry. I must just have kicked me written on the bottom of my breeches or on my forehead because, but you know what? Let's be that kind of people. If you see someone is acting extra sad or a little more gloomy than usual, talk to them. Find out what's going on. Don't be afraid of them saying, hey, that's none of your business. Deep down, I think they'll appreciate it. Provide meaning making. You matter. Try to make sense out of this. I was 19 years old, and the first funeral I ever conducted was for a 14-year-old member of my youth group who took his life. It lasted 3 minutes. I was thankful that there was a seasoned Methodist minister sitting beside me because the dad went to the Methodist church and the mom went to the church where I served as a youth minister. He just took over and handled the rest. I would have been up the creek because I was a mess. You know why? He left a note. You know why he took his life? His grades failed. His parents made him quit football. He took his life. They buried him with a football under this arm and an Incredible Hulk doll under this arm because Incredible Hulk was really big. Excuse the pun. Really big at that time. That was my first funeral. And guess what happened to his parents? Within 3 years, what do you think that happened to the parents? Divorced. divorce because each blamed the other. See, they played that second guessing game and that blame game. All right, let's use this metaphor. Be on the lookout for drowning. This is not original with me. It's in one of these books. Think about, we're all out by a river, and some are upstream. Upstream, we're giving them comfort and spiritual support and encouragement. You're doing a good job. That's easy for the cheerleaders and the football players and the stars. It's difficult for the kids in the band. I was a kid in the band. Played a trombone, third chair, because there were only 3 trombone players. Okay? You get the picture? So upstream, there's a lot of encouragement. But look at midstream. This is in the congregation. They go to youth activities. They go to camp. There's some brothers keepers. But look downstream. This is after the drowning. Where we're missing people is between midstream and downstream. We're losing people most of all between 5th and 9th grade. That's the number one age group, 5th and 9th grade. And second, 19 to 25. Because 19 to 25 don't feel like they fit anywhere anymore. So let's do a better job upstream and midstream so we don't have to deal so much with the downstream. Topics to share. Help people make meaning. Meet needs for lacking and longing. Every once in a while I carry a 16-year-old friend of mine that thinks it's weird. I let him go out and drive my pickup when he was 14. But his mom just said, look, his dad, we're divorced. His dad lives in another state. He just needs a positive male role model. Every service, he comes and looks me up after worship. He used to give me a hug, but then he got 16 and somebody said, that's gay. So now he just shakes my hand. Someone is bigger than we are. That someone is the Lord. Every 12-step program I know of looks to a higher power. I'm like Acts 17 where Paul says, I know who that unknown God is. I know who that higher power is. It's Jesus Christ. Promote emotional health. Days like today have not motivational speakers like Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live, but have people like Lonnie Jones and Ben Hayes come in and speak. Prayers for the struggling. Promote hope. Now, I want to say something. You know, in parentheses there, gay youth. I want to talk about that for just a moment. Among the teenagers that we're losing to suicide, and I'm not saying every teenager that commits suicide is gay, the number one group committing suicide among males are homosexual boys. Because what stigma is attached with a same-sex attraction in high school today? I mean, I tried to talk to the teenagers at Hamilton about people who are different and people who might be, they didn't say, oh, that's wrong, that's sinful. They said, and I won't use the word they used. When every movie and every television program and everything streaming on Netflix has a gay character in it, and our culture is advocating gay rights, and it's normal, when someone has those feelings and they're being told it's wrong, it's bad, then what's the solution? So many of them reach out. Look, I'm not for being gay, okay? I teach against homosexuality. I think it's strictly forbidden in the Bible. Well, when someone is struggling with sexual identity as a teenager, it's not the time to beat them over the head. It's the time to listen. You know, I'm about to run out of time. I'm going to say something probably controversial. It's easy when you've been encouraged that that's an alternative lifestyle that's acceptable when you're young, 15, 16, 17. But who wants to see 75 and 80-year-old gay men or gay women? It may be cute and pretty when they're young. It's kind of like a tattoo. A guy showed me, I went to the nursing home the other day, and a guy had a tattoo he got in the Navy. He said it was a woman, a beautiful woman. I thought it was a whale. I really did. I said, so you got that whale on your arm? He said, well, that's a beautiful woman. I'm like, if you say so, it might be like that dragon on the ceiling we talked about earlier this morning. It didn't look like, it was a whale, I'm telling you. What we do when we're young and our skin is tight and we look good in our jeans is not going to be so attractive when we're older. And so we have to be really careful. All right. A coming of age program. What's that about? I think we need to celebrate life passages. I noticed that when a young man who's been baptized serves the table for the first time or leads a song or leads a prayer, we need to make a hoopla out of it. When a young woman teaches a children's class or speaks to the ladies group or participates as leaders, we need to be just as proud of her and promote her. And create circles of support groups. If there's someone, and if we may have to call in someone from mental health or someone who's trained in that. All right, general ideas. Take youth on a restoration tour. Give them a sense of history. Who are we? Give them a sense of identity. Why are we different? Why are Christians different? Bring in speakers on mental health to discuss the personal struggles. Include a suicide prevention walk that includes the entire community. That's especially important around holidays. And finally, have a candle lighting ceremony in the community in December for all bereaved survivors. Not just suicide, but all bereaved. For everybody we've lost. Most small towns in Alabama and Tennessee will have a monument around the courthouse that'll list all the soldiers who died during this war or this war or this war. At Tupelo, Mississippi, they have an exact replica of just smaller, permanent replica of the Vietnam War memorial. The exact replica. But up in the front, there's a list of all Mississippians who died during the Vietnam War. Well, we don't want to celebrate death, but we want to let people know that their loved one's not forgotten. And the year that they would graduate, maybe you think I'm stretching this, the year they would have graduated, I think we need to leave an empty seat for them. All right. Who has questions or comments, follow-up?
Then what do you think, start with teenagers first, young people, what are red flags that should be looked out for?
Number one, isolation. People who tend to isolate themselves from everyone else. Loners. People are loners. And third, people who overly, they're out of character. They do things that are abnormal for them. Change. Yeah, it's a sudden change. Who wants to add something to that? That's fine.
Helpless, hopeless, or worthless?
Yes. Yeah. Especially when people say, nobody loves me. And I hear that a lot and I'm not running down broken homes. 50% of the young people in America will live in a broken home before they're age 18, 50%. So that hopelessness, let's give them a reason. Especially for the non-performers, for the non-athletes, for the one who didn't get a lot of recognition.
Attention seekers and hurters.
Yeah,
Those that either hurt themselves or hurt others, bullies.
yeah.
Or people that are struggling mentally.
Right.
When you talk about the people, when they withdraw themselves, when you see people like in the workforce that their work ethic has changed, their
Yeah.
attitude toward their job, you might see it like someone in church. You start watching that person as they're falling away from church,
Yeah.
the same person that's possibly wanting to take their life, they're falling away from society.
Yeah, they're isolating. Also, a giveaway is when they start getting rid of personal items. I'm not going to be needing this. I mean, that's obvious. I'm not going to be needing this.
Can we teach not to ask, are you thinking about hurting yourself? It's not gonna hurt anymore.
Right.
And we don't ask, are you thinking about doing something dumb? They don't think it's dumb.
No.
We straight up ask, are you thinking about murdering yourself?
Yeah, right.
And if they hesitate, it's yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll give you a pushback like nobody's been, no, man, but if they go, well, no, that's a yes.
And as a high school principal, ask it 2-3 times a week.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, I know, and Lonnie and so many others in this room, and Teddy, y'all are so much more knowledgeable. I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, there's certain questions you can fish for where, like, one, if they've already expressed that desire, I know take it pretty seriously, but isn't it then like, do they have a plan, means to the plan, timetable?
Yeah.
Those are ones I've used, especially in youth ministry, where there's been certain times where like I can't get off the phone or I can't stop talking to you, but then I'm over here on another device getting a pen, before they get out of my sight.
The 3 questions I've asked for 30 years are, do you have a plan?
Yeah.
And then second, how would you do it? Not just do you have a plan, have you thought about it? Are you thinking about killing yourself? How would you do it? And then the third question is, when are you going to do it?
What is the legal responsibility? Because like I had told Lonnie earlier, first responder, we got a call 2 weeks ago, a young lady had made some comments, she'd called the doctor's office, they said, well, call 911. Well, we're that department, that the fire department, the box and the Band-Aid, those 3 gets response. We had deputy sheriff, we had fire department, fire and rescue, and then paramedics. And then I was told, oh, well, if she expressed this, then somebody should have loaded her up and took her right then. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm back home. I didn't do it. Now, is this falling on my shoulders if something happens? It kind of put me in a spot. What more should I have done? Now, RPS that was there, they talked to her for about 30 minutes, and we all left the scene and left the young lady at the house with 5 other people there. But is there a law that, I know once if somebody's in the act.
In Huntsville, we have a mental health officer. They get their jurisdiction from the probate judge. A lot of our cops are mental health officers. We have some civilians who are mental health officers. You don't have that in your county, then you talk to your probate judge, and a mental health officer can order an involuntary commitment. So if I run into somebody, even in my practice, and I think they're going to hurt themselves or kill themselves, I call a cop and go, I got a guy walking out my door in about 15 minutes. You need to be standing there and meet him. They confront them, and if they, in their professional judgment, believe this person is an immediate danger to themselves or others, no question, they hook them up in involuntary commitment.
I want to remind, excuse me, I want to remind all teachers, social workers, mental health workers, and preachers and youth ministers We are mandatory reporters.
And in the school system, the legislature said was something that's referred to as the Jason Flat Act.
Yeah.
If you come up and tell me, and I think you suicide, and your mama don't want to take you, then I give her the option of
Yeah.
you can pay the ambulance bill, or you can take it.
That's great.
Because I do not turn loose.
No. Well, not only that, but think about this. If we are going to report sexual abuse, or we're going to report child abuse, or are we going to report that someone is going to murder somebody? We're required by law. And if they're going to murder themselves, that's still murder. So I say yes, Roger. I think we're mandatory reporters for that. I think I've run over time, Justin. I apologize.